Hi, I'm Sydney Lesser, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Ivanti, and this is my good friend, Chris Goettl, VP of Product Marketing for Exposure Management here at Ivanti.
Hello, everyone.
Today, we want to talk about all the headlines we've seen with Mythos and Glasswing and all the chaos that we're seeing. A New York Times article recently came out calling it worse than the nuclear bomb. So we're seeing a lot of really crazy things happening in this world. Chris, can you tell us what's going on with that and kind of the backlash we're seeing?
Yeah, I think everybody's heard about Mythos, the new language model from Anthropic. It's basically a new generation of large language models that really specializes in finding and exploiting vulnerabilities in software. Now, Project Glasswing was the private invite of a whole bunch of organizations to come and use Mythos within their organizations to test out the language model and see how it's working. And Anthropic's been very guarded about who they're letting in, and there's obviously a lot of hype around this. There's a lot of back and forth across the world, but this is just one of many new models coming into the market. These language models are definitely going to be moving the vulnerability exploit and research side of the world forward very, very significantly. You've got language models that are now specializing in being able to be able to identify and exploit vulnerabilities with a higher degree of success. Um, the exploit success from Project Glasswing is showing that the AI model is 72.4% more effective at exploiting vulnerabilities, as an example. It's a pretty significant jump from previous technologies. So, what really happened here is the level of skill set of a researcher to be able to go in and use a model like this to find and exploit vulnerabilities is becoming more accessible. Even prior to Mythos, there were already language models out there that many vendors, including Ivanti, were already using to identify and close vulnerabilities within their software. This is now making it so that the experts aren't the only ones to be able to play with this. It's coming down to a level where more generalists are going to be able to utilize this and to be able to successfully find and chain together even multiple vulnerabilities to exploit a piece of software and be able to identify those so we can close them out more effectively. Now, a couple of interesting things that have already happened. Mozilla is a good example. They were able to use Mythos to find 271 vulnerabilities, and they resolved those in Firefox 150, which just released not too long ago here. There has been other interesting findings like OpenBSD. Many of you probably heard about the 27-year-old vulnerability that they were able to exploit in the OpenBSD Linux platform. And those are just a couple examples of where Mythos is already uncovering a lot of interesting things.
So it's interesting that we're seeing it both on the threat actor side and also from a vendor perspective of how we can protect ourselves better. So there is kind of some good in this, if you will.
Absolutely. Now, the way that organizations are finding and responding to exploitable vulnerabilities is evolving yet again. We're talking about an industry that hasn't fully adopted the risk-based model yet, and now the target is moving yet again. So you've got even coming into this year, we had Google's research showing that the average time to exploit a vulnerability was about 5 days. That means from release from the vendor, roughly 5 days out, you will start to see exploits of vulnerabilities that were disclosed from that product release. And I've been doing a lot of research into this since Mythos came out, and there's been all this buzz around it. And I've been finding that 0 days aside, a 0 day exploit meaning somebody exploited that vulnerability before the vendor knew about it and resolved it. Um, if the disclosure occurs when the patch releases, that starts that clock ticking. The average rate now is 5 days from release, and I've seen a number of different updates from a lot of very popular software running in all of our environments showing multiple exploits within a week or less of the release from the vendor. So it's absolutely accurate, the Google stat there. Now, organizations aren't able to keep up with that pace. It's the very few organizations are patching on a continuous basis. So this means that our ability to shorten that window is going to become more urgent than ever. And that's kind of where the starting point of this conversation really comes into play. It's not just exploits are being found and resolved quicker, it's the frequency of updates coming out are going to increase, and the window of opportunity for us to close that and really reduce that exposure time is going to decrease even further. Speculation right now is already leaning towards having to get down to 72 to 48 hours. In fact, if you look at the Australian Signals Directorate, they're already messaging toward, requiring a 48-hour closure on known exploited vulnerabilities. There's multiple groups that are looking at dialing down their exposure window to as little as 72 hours, like CISA and European guidance are already leaning towards that 72-hour window. So things are accelerating very, very quickly.
So it's really like this was a stress test and enterprises are really failing.
Absolutely. And this points out one of the first major challenges that organizations are going to run into, which is their blind spots. What are the enterprise blind spots right now? Well, one of the biggest ones is still asset visibility. To try to keep up with this pace, not only do we have to understand where exposures are and be able to close them quickly, we've got to get a better handle on what assets are in our environment. So Gartner's been doing research on this for years in the discovery and asset visibility space, and they're still saying that in the post-COVID world, the blind spots that organizations have around asset visibility are still between 20 to 40%. That's actually up a little bit, since the pre-COVID world, where it was probably more of a 30% at the high end. But that means we've got to figure out how to close that blind spot first. Then we need to make sure that we've got exposure data for all of the assets we know about. And then we need to get a risk adjusted view of the world. So doing our maintenance once a month, even if we say, yeah, we can get from 14 days down to a 5-day window for it, if we're still only kicking that process off once per month on Patch Tuesday, we are not actually achieving that continuous remediation process. We've got to get to a point where, oh, hey, yeah, from the point where the Windows OS update comes out, yeah, we can resolve that within 5 days. But what about when Chrome and Firefox and Edge are releasing on a weekly basis? Can we close those vulnerabilities within 5 days of each of those releases? That means we got to get on a weekly cadence for many applications within our environment. So the enterprise blind spots, asset visibility being a key one that still exists within a lot of organizations. There's the exposure blind spot. Do I know what exposures are across my environment and can I keep up with that continuously? And then there's the risk adjusted perspective of all of the findings, which ones actually matter. Because just trying to go and continually update every piece of software every time it comes out is not going to be sustainable. We've got to get to a point where we can adjust and only update the things that matter most within that window, and everything else can wait for that once a month maintenance that's going to go and do the heavy lift of a whole bunch of other things. But it's really those three blind spots that enterprises really have to dial in effectively to keep up with what's about to happen.
So ultimately, right, if you can't see it, you can't patch it, and you have so much risk coming at you. But you lean into that, where does it land with the board level failure? So you're in the process at the bottom, right? Patching, you have to keep up with your compliances, with your timelines. You're already struggling. All these new vulnerabilities with AI are coming at you. How do you reposition it for governance? You can't patch everything. Even if you can see everything, you still can't patch all the vulnerabilities or all the patches that are coming out every single month, every single week. Like you said, it's
Right.
coming whenever. How do you really keep up with that and know where to go?
Yeah. So this is really going to reveal a governance breakdown that's kind of been there for a long time, but we've really not been addressing it directly. Larger much more mature, much more highly regulated organizations have been pushing this boundary for a while. And this is where technologies like risk-based vulnerability management platforms and things like that have developed from. But even that hasn't been able to keep up with the long term of where we need to get to. We need to bring this together in a different way. So let's start with the first kind of major failure at that communication level with the board. We are currently dealing with dashboards that are only a partial truth on what's going on in our environment. So what I mean by that, I was actually talking with a company recently where they they were feeling very happy about the fact that they were meeting or exceeding their target KPI each month of 95 or I'm sorry, 90% compliance. Um, so
That's
what that
pretty
meant to
high.
them was by the end of their maintenance window, 90% of what they said needed to be done got done. So we dug into that more. I wanted to understand, okay, what's in scope for your compliance metric? And they're like, oh, so we do the Microsoft updates, of course. And then we do a handful of third-party applications, and they're manually packaging these up and publishing those through the Microsoft platform that they're utilizing today. And I'm like, okay, so all right, that's a limited number of applications that you're doing. And they did have, some of the big ones like Mozilla and Chrome and stuff like that. But if they're only packaging it up once a month, right at that time where they're starting maintenance, I mean, I can look at this year alone. Chrome had at least 2 0 days that came out 3 to 4 days after Microsoft's Patch Tuesday, which would have basically been after they packaged up. So they're basically leaving that exposure of a known exploited vulnerability for 3 to 4 weeks until they get to it again. When we say that a lot of dashboards today are based on partial truths, those are the types of challenges that basically we're not getting the full understanding up to the board, up to the C-suite on the current state of our risk levels. Other organizations, they have very heavy ITIL processes for approvals of things. Like everything has to go through an approval process. Doesn't matter if we did the same thing last month; it goes through the approval process. Well, if our average time to exploit is 5 days, that process-heavy regimen is going to be still in its throes before that window's already over and done with. So we're leaving ourselves exposed because of heavy processes on top of this. And this isn't, an anti-ITIL statement. It's more of a we have to get to a point where the decisions that are going to be the same every month, no matter what, they can skip the long process, and the red tape is meant for those things that are a unexpected change that does need proper review. So being able to get more accurate on the paths that each type of exposure follows to figure out what to do with it. So the last one is again that risk adjusted view of the world. I still talk to way too many organizations that use vendor severity or CVSS score as their measurement of what they're focused on or not. Microsoft is still averaging around 20-ish known exploited vulnerabilities a year that are 0-day exploits on Patch Tuesday, and most of those, around 18 on average, are going to be important, with a CVSS score between 6.2 and 7.8. That means those organizations that are prioritizing vendor critical and a CVSS score above 8.0 are missing the majority of the ones that are actively being targeted by threat actors. And this is only going to get worse because of the level of sophistication of this new generation of AI tools.
And that really, especially for Microsoft, is a good call out because they have been last month the highest number of patches they've ever released. I think we're going to keep seeing that for a long time now, especially in this post Mythos world. How are they're going to continue to release more and more? You can't just go by a blanket number of you actually have to do all this huge bucket, but maybe you're even ignoring something that wasn't in that high level bucket.
Right.
So I think here kind of highlights you have to know your risk, where your risk is, where to go into it, defining it, monitoring it, identifying it, all within your personal organization.
Yeah, it really speaks to needing to define a new model to operate under. The way we've been doing things for, years now, it's a process that can't keep up with the pace going forward. So let me break down what this new model looks like in a kind of a simplistic way. It's really defining upfront what is your organization's risk appetite and being able to monitor your risk posture against that definition. So what do I mean by that? Um, let's go back to a couple of simple examples. The Windows operating system, in fact, all operating systems, it's one of the most vulnerable parts of our entire infrastructure. The majority of our attack surface is an operating system somewhere on some piece of technology. Those When's the last time we said, no, absolutely not? We're not going to update the next OS version. Well, when we see a breaking change, yeah, that might be a time to pause. But for the most part, every month, yeah, we don't have to sit down and talk about it or go through the ITIL release process for it. We know we're going to say yes to starting the process of rolling out the latest OS updates. Okay, browsers, another easy one. The majority of us don't have to deal with significant usability impacts when we update browsers. There's some niche cases where that might be more sensitive, some custom scenarios where it could happen, but most of us, it's a pretty easy decision. Let's just go ahead and update those. Well, I can go into most organizations and ask them those questions, and they're going to say, "Oh yeah, I know exactly when we're going to start pushing the OS update. I know exactly what the schedule is going to be. I know the rollout plan. Like all of that's just well defined." So, how do we get to the point where more of what we're doing on a regular basis is meeting that predefinition, that risk appetite that we can define? Then we just need to be able to configure a system to say, here's the outcomes that I want to march towards and let that automation loose. Because here's the key: this new generation of AI security models is a highly automated, continuous model for finding vulnerabilities. If we don't counter it with a highly automated management platform to be able to keep up with this pace, we're going to get buried. So that's kind of the heart of this new model. Define your risk appetite, monitor your risk posture. The things that are meeting that definition, we don't have to go through heavy process for anymore. We still want guardrails. When you're doing changes like this, we're still going to use the technologies like ring deployment for major rollouts and be able to control the quality of what's going out and be able to pump the brakes if something is going wrong. The the balancing act, though, is how many of those decisions are pre-made and just going to start to follow through on that process, and how many of those have to go through a more rigorous change control process. Now, if we get a vulnerability on a platform that doesn't happen as often, that does have a lot more complexity. Yes, we absolutely want to be able to take those findings and route them through the ticketing process so that we can get those approvals in place, get the right teams mobilized, because those types of updates also aren't going to be easily automatable. So really, it's now that we've got this new model defined, we need a technology that can keep up with this. And if you're still kind of just using the built-in update mechanisms for the platforms you're on and packaging up once in a while the applications that you also want to manage, that's not going to be able to do it. That's a very semi-manual, semi-automated kind of approach to doing this. You really need an autonomous endpoint management platform with the capabilities to manage this type of load in a continuous model to be able to keep up with this pace, to be able to define those windows in advance. Still have your regular maintenance where, on patch Tuesday, you're going to start that massive rollout of all the other things going on. But really, anything else, you could start to define specific buckets for doing things like priority updates on a more weekly or even multiple times a week kind of basis. You can have a 0-day response bucket when you really need to go fast. And that is ready to go, fully configured. And all it's waiting for is the approval to say this particular vulnerability or this particular update needs to go into that bucket. But having that ability to um, define that policy in a system where it's just going to continuously keep it up. This is what's going to help us get from, weeks down to days or hours in our response times.
Yeah, that need for the continuous system, that was a great call out, and the quick need to connect. You can't wait for A to find B to find C. It has to be a continuous streaming loop without any disruption in between. Based on what you said, it's not really about the tools. It has to all go together. It's the company, it's finding the truth fastest. Once you've set your risk, how do you then monitor, identify, and do that, like you said, continuous system of repeating again and again and again?
Absolutely, yeah, and this is not a there's no technology silver bullets that's just going to instantly solve this problem. It will be a combination of technology and rethinking our approach. Even the KPIs that you're using to measure your success levels are going to shift to this new model. And it will take kind of a unified buy-in across the organization to change that mindset and keep up with the pace of how fast things are coming at us. Since the beginning of this year, roughly around the mid-February timeframe, we already started to see a spike of about 20 to 30% on a monthly basis, more patches that our team is managing into our content catalog on a monthly basis. So this spike is already happening. Organizations are already seeing this occur. It's going to further accelerate from here.
So this is really our new normal. We're not in unprecedented times. Once again, this is our new normal and what we should see and expect for the future, really.
So this doesn't mean that somebody wrote Skynet and the world is going to start burning down and AI is taking over. So don't panic on that. But it does mean that we do need to implement a higher degree of automation to fight back against the automation that is now, presenting against us. So, Sydney, one of the common questions I get is, "Great, you help me understand the problem more, but what do I do next?" You can basically get on a live call with one of our teams and they can walk you through the Ivanti AEM platform and our autonomous patch management capabilities and really start to look at how do we help bridge that gap between exposure through to remediation.
If you're not ready to take that step to talk to somebody live, we also offer a free discovery assessment. And those are always my favorite to sit in on with clients because you find a lot of things you did not know and a lot of moments.
And October may be a couple of months off yet, but it's going to be rapidly approaching, and that is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We're going to, when we do the next episode of the IT Insider in October, we're going to be doing a look back on how far has this progressed since then. So definitely tune back into the IT Insider series again, coming up in October for that Cybersecurity Awareness Month, where we'll take a deeper look at what's progressed in the few months since.